I have always been interested in the paranormal and afterlife, everything from ghosts to angels. I think that everyone has that curiosity of the great unknown. Hilary Duff. I'm Mike with List 25, and here are 25 frightening paranormal events witnessed by people you'd trust. 25. Lincoln's levitating piano. Nettie Colburn Maynard was said to be Mary Todd Lincoln's closest spiritualist friend, and during a seance, when compelled by the spirits to play the grand piano, it began to rise off the floor. Both President Lincoln and Colonel Simon Case are said to have climbed on the piano, causing it to jump and shake violently until they climbed off. It's recorded that Lincoln would later refer to the levitation as proof of an invisible power. 24. Mary Lincoln's ghostly photo. After her husband died, Mary Todd Lincoln met with the spiritual photographer William H. Mumler for a photograph. Surprisingly, long before Photoshop was invented, Mumler did indeed produce a photograph that appears to show the ghost of President Lincoln behind her. That photo is now displayed in the Allen County Public Library, Fort Wayne, Indiana. 23. The New Mexico Police Ghost. Officer Carl Romero of the Espanola, New Mexico Police was on guard duty in 2014 when he saw something in the heavily secured entryway to the station on camera. Initially, he thought it might be an insect, but closer inspection does indeed reveal a blurry, white humanoid figure. The story made local news, and detectives at the station claim that isn't the first time paranormal activity has occurred. 22. Bobby Jindal, former governor of Louisiana, failed exorcist. Bobby Jindal, governor of Louisiana up to 2016, wrote that his crush Susan was diagnosed with cancer. Shortly after this, she began having visions and smelling of sulfur. One day, when they had all gathered as friends to pray for her, Susan began emitting strange guttural sounds and fell to the floor. As Jindal put his hand on her to help with the prayer, a strange voice came from her and berated him for not being able to reveal his true feelings for her. Eventually, she came around and was seemingly cured. 21. Salt Lake's Capitol Theater haunting. Dave Murphy, a Salt Lake County Sheriff's deputy, was moonlighting as an overnight security in Salt Lake City's historic Capitol Theater when he claims he saw dark shadows moving through walls. Once he was on patrol when he began hearing doors violently slamming, causing the windows to vibrate. He then looked up to see a woman dressed in clothing from the early 1900s who walked right past him while he was in the control room. At one point, the black shadows actually attacked him. 20. Lincoln and Naked Churchill. During World War II, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill visited the White House several times. He was staying in the Lincoln bedroom, where else, and had just finished a bath. As he strolled into the bedroom, naked and smoking his customary cigar, he found President Lincoln leaning on the fireplace. According to Churchill, he addressed the spirit amiably, making eye contact and saying, "Good evening, Mr. President. You seem to have me at a disadvantage." In response, Lincoln's ghost smiled and then faded away. 19. The Voice of the Mother. In 2015, a 25-year-old woman and her 18-month-old daughter were heading home when her car hit a concrete barrier and ended up upside down in a river. When officers spotted an arm hanging out of the wreckage, they immediately jumped into the river to see if there were any survivors. On their way to the car, all 4 men heard a woman's voice calling out to them for help. They pushed through the river to the car, only to find that the mother was dead. However, once the car was turned over, they immediately spotted and removed the 18-month-old who was suspended from the water by a safety belt. Miraculously, the little girl survived. They still cannot rationally say where the voice came from, though. 18. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert via John Brown. 2 years after Prince Albert died, Queen Victoria was contacted by a 13-year-old clairvoyant boy who claimed to have spoken to Albert and later produced a letter from him. The letter apparently used details and a pet name that nobody would have known. Eventually, a young John Brown took his place. He took up residence at the Queen's request and acted as the intermediary between Queen Victoria and the ghost of Albert for 30 years. Whenever she had an important decision to make, she consulted Albert through Brown. 17. Air Force meets UFO. On December 28, 1980, strange lights were reported just outside of the Royal Air Force Base Woodridge in the UK. The force found themselves facing a triangular UFO. The craft seemed electrified and gave off blue and yellow light. It had engraved inscriptions on its sides that St. James Penniston touched and later claimed had downloaded some kind of binary code directly to his brain. After his retirement, Sergeant Penniston publicly shared his account, which was denied by officials, and Woodridge has since been known as Britain's Roswell. 16. The Devil and Don Decker. Don Decker was a low-level inmate for receiving stolen property. While on compassion leave in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, Decker became dizzy and fell unconscious in the upstairs bathroom where he was washing his hands. When his friends noticed he had deep scratches on his wrist, they asked him what had happened, and he claimed to have a vision of an old man wearing a crown. Shortly after his story, water began dripping from the roof and walls. Despite no pipes running in that part of the house, the indoor rain continued, as well as began rising from the floor to the ceiling. Decker started levitating in a trance state after police showed up. When Decker returned to prison, the strange phenomena continued until after an exorcism was performed. 15. The Ghost of 9/11. Several first responders at the Staten Island landfill where the 9/11 rubble was taken report being offered coffee and sandwiches by an African-American lady dressed in an old-style Red Cross uniform. Lieutenant Frank Mara of the NYPD, now retired, saw the lady several times from about 50 yards away, but when he strained to get a better look at her each time, she was gone. There are separate reports from different officers regarding the same woman. 14. The Scottish Poltergeist. On August 15, 2016, police were called to a home in Rutherglen, Glasgow. Police arrived and were immediately stunned to witness the disturbances for themselves. Odd incidences like clothes flying across the room on their own, lights turning themselves off, oven doors opening and closing, and even a chihuahua moved from the ground to the top of a 7-foot hedge. The officers that witnessed the incidences are considered credible and have 20 years on the force. 13. The Queen and the Return of President Lincoln. No doubt about it, Abe Lincoln is the busiest presidential ghost on record. In 1942, Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands was staying in the White House waiting to return to her country. Late in the evening, she heard footsteps coming down the hall and finally a knock at the door. Hoping for good news from her country, she dressed appropriately and answered the door. When she opened the door, she saw an immensely tall man in a frock coat and top hat. She was confused until she realized she could partially see through this strange man, at which point she fainted. When she came to, she described the man to the First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, who sent everyone away and apologized for not having warned the Queen of Lincoln's ghost sooner. 12. Jimmy Carter's UFO experience. One night, while preparing to give a speech in 1969, 2 years before becoming governor, Jimmy Carter claims to have witnessed a UFO. The object in the sky turned from blue to red and then to white. According to the report, 10 to 12 other people witnessed the phenomenon. 11. Roswell. The story goes that a UFO crashed and an official headline was released saying the military had captured a flying disc. 24 hours later, that headline was retracted and replaced by a crashed weather balloon. Lieutenant Walter Hunt was the public relations officer at the base in 1947, and upon his death, a previously written account of having been shown the UFO wreckage and the bodies of their alien inhabitants was released. 10. Enfield Poltergeist. Police and the now famous paranormal investigators were called to a seemingly possessed home. All the makings of a classic poltergeist were there, but the one part of the story that is exceptional was that when the police were called, Constable Carolyn Heaps witnessed an armchair levitating off the floor and moving 4 feet on its own. Though she had no means of helping the family, she signed an affidavit swearing what she witnessed to be true. 9. Silbury Hill Beings. A police sergeant that requested to not be named was off duty when he witnessed suspicious individuals examining recent crop circles near Silbury Hill. The figures all appeared to be over 6 feet tall with blonde hair. As he approached the field, he heard a noise that resembled the crackle of static electricity. When he tried to enter the field, they looked up and ran away with supernatural speed. 8. Michelle Obama's White House haunting stories. As we've seen, there's no shortage of Lincoln ghost stories. Apparently, the Obamas have woken up to strange sounds in the hallway, and other family members have reported sensations of someone or something chewing on their feet. 7. Indiana Demon House. A police captain in Gary, Indiana says he believes a family experienced supernatural terror in a rental house. There were reports of the children levitating, mysterious footprints appearing throughout the house, swarms of flies in the wintertime, invisible friends, and one reported incident in which the children walked backwards up the walls in the presence of a family case manager and a hospital nurse that were visiting. Family services caseworkers, priests, and the aforementioned police captain are among those who say they believe the little house was filled with supernatural evil. 6. Devil's Peak. Maurice Frenchy Theriault had a traumatic childhood, suffering various forms of abuse from his father. By 1985, he had married and purchased a farm in Warren, Massachusetts. It didn't take long for Frenchy's demons to begin to materialize. Blood would appear randomly throughout the house, fires would break out in random places, and they both began hearing voices. Eventually, a duplicate of Frenchy would appear to his wife in other rooms, but trying to talk or follow the ghost would cause it to disappear. This was witnessed by several people, including a local police officer. 5. Your weapons are useless. Former Air Force Captain Robert Salas had the insane job of working on intercontinental ballistic missiles in Montana. He outright affirms that UFOs are not only real, but they have no trouble messing with our ultimate nuclear weapons. Flybys were allegedly common and would scramble the nukes, so the Air Force had to go back and reactivate them manually every time. Captain Salas also gave an account of he and his men approaching a triangular craft spewing some kind of molten metal. When he reported to his superiors, they didn't dismiss or mock him, but simply told him it didn't happen. 4. Panteones Metro Station. Train engineers and station workers have heard knocks and screams down the track in the tunnels when no trains are running, and a gray apparition shows up every time the station closes. What caps it off is that an entire video of engineers hearing those screams exists to prove it. Fittingly, Panteones means graveyard in Spanish. 3. The devil is angry. When firefighters assembled to respond to a 911 call, the engine that had been running fine 20 minutes before wouldn't start. When they finally got it running and made it to the house, it was fully enveloped and burning in very odd ways. Flames would shoot out the windows parallel to the ground and make a sharp 90-degree turn upward, and the basement was determined to be rocking. Investigators the next day found that nothing in the basement had been burned, even though the house itself was incinerated. Photos of the fire developed by the investigator allegedly show the face of the devil in the smoke and flames. 2. The Montrose Ghost. When a Royal Flying Corps biplane pilot crashed and died in 1913, a government investigation determined the pilot, Lieutenant Desmond Arthur, was at fault for the crash, despite a previous belief it was due to a faulty repair. Personnel at Montrose Airfield began having visions of a ghostly pilot, and some recognized it as Desmond. Finally, an editor of a flight magazine lobbied to have the investigation reopened, and the verdict was that Desmond was not responsible. The ghost of Desmond was never seen again, except allegedly once, when he appeared to be smiling. 1. Reagan's Lincoln Story. At a 1986 state dinner, President Reagan relayed a tale of Lucky, the first dog, who had twice barked frantically in the Lincoln bedroom and backed out, refusing to set foot over the threshold. Later, he continued by explaining that his daughter Maureen and her husband stay in the Lincoln bedroom when they visit. Maureen's husband had awoken in the middle of the night to see a transparent figure standing at the window looking out. Then it turned and disappeared. Maureen teased her husband about it for a month until she woke up one morning and saw the same figure in the same place. If you like this video, be sure to check out our friends over at Dark 5 for more creepy and mysterious Top 5 videos. And as always, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. But most of all, stay curious.